at the same time, so it's pretty cool. And then of course you've got these drones here that have, you know, kind of like a personnel drone, shoots mortars, machine guns. Did you ever see these in
they took
combat?
what they did is they took that EOD robot that they use and then just fixed a weapon on there and then added a control to it with a screen, and they were able to drive it around and shoot, try to keep people out of the way.
Right, and this came out in 2011. Now we have, from the Daily Mail, U.S. military is testing a gun that could turn anyone into an ace sniper. It's basically a smart gun that helps you aim. So no more missed shots. They're all headshots at this point. And that's going to be coming to a battlefield. And then
it gives you the actual wind corrections and all that stuff too, to tell that shooter what to do to put in to get that. I mean, it definitely dumbs it down for anybody.
Makes anybody a world-class sniper. Here's the railgun. Hurls a shell over 5,000 miles per hour. It takes them up to Mach 7. And basically, this is to get the projectile past armor, you know, anything.
It can go through anything. I mean, that's a scary
Use electromagnetic technology. So basically, nothing is going to be safe at this point. You're not going to be able to hide anywhere. Alex has talked many times about the bunker-busting weapons, the sabos that are up orbiting the Earth at this time. So there are weapons like this, but the video that you just saw with the Taliban, UFO killing Taliban spaceship doesn't exist. It's been debunked. Stay tuned for PrisonPlanet.tv for more types of videos like this. You can watch Paul Joseph Watson's video that he made last week debunking the chemtrail video that somebody put out that went viral. So you can't always trust everything you see out there on the internet, and it definitely helps to do your own fact checking. And you know, like Joe did, he just went and found the video of the same exact weapon that was being depicted as being a UFO type based sparkler gun. So that's the video for today, and subscribe and send this out to people you know.
INFOWARS.com, where there's a war on for your mind.
We've talked a lot this week about what's going on in Albuquerque. Now, of course, they reached national attention because of the execution of a homeless man about 5 or 6 weeks ago. In the interim, there have been several more fatal shootings by the police department. And we have 2 former officers from the Albuquerque Police Department here tonight to talk about the attitude there. We have former police officer John Doyle and former police sergeant Thomas Grover, who is now working to become a civil rights attorney to fight from the outside and try to accomplish what he couldn't on the inside. As he told me, he doesn't like bullies, and he's going to do something about it as a lawyer that he couldn't do as a police officer. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Thomas Grover, former sergeant with the Albuquerque Police Department, and John Doyle, former police officer there. We've had so many incidents throughout the country of the police completely changing their attitude toward the public. We just covered a story out of Miami where they were looking for someone who had killed a cop, but once they found him, instead of trying to arrest him, they had about 24 officers fire several hundred bullets at him, just shooting the entire place up. There were children ducking for cover. And we saw this sort of thing happening in Albuquerque. It's what brought it to everybody's attention, how Albuquerque is perhaps one of the places that has one of the highest fatality rates of police shootings there. But this is something that's symptomatic all over the country. What's changed about the attitude of policing?
I think from what I've seen, and both from my own studies and in pursuit of my master's dealing with police departments, what's really happened over the last 20 years is there's been this migration from police departments where they're public servants to really government enforcement agents. And in support of that, that's when you've gotten all this sort of hyper-militarization, this hyper-paramilitarized structure of the police departments, where they're no longer, you know, your friendly police officer, where they're actually embedded and part of the community, but in fact, you know, isolated from the community and, you know, the coercive arm of whatever municipality, county, or state employs them. And what you're seeing here in Albuquerque, I think, is reflective of what's happening across the country, where, you know, officers, for whatever reason, their departments are supporting, if not endorsing, falling to heightened levels of force rather than, you know, their really best and most skilled weapon, which is their mouth, their ability to communicate.
Yeah.
And that's all symptomatic of going from being a public servant to a government enforcement agent.
Yeah, we used to have the cop on the beat, and but then that changed sometime in the 70s. We started hearing in all the Dirty Harry movies about the police referring to the public as civilians. I mean, that was a hint that there was some kind of a militaristic thing going, but it's really accelerated, hasn't it, in the aftermath of September 11th and the creation of Homeland Security? I mean, that's where I see it coming from. Is that your perception as police officers?
I agree.
Yes.
And, you know, real quick in my background, you know, I was a field officer. I was a bicycle patrol officer where I immersed myself out in the environment and had, you know, numerous contacts. And then I saw these things that I wanted to change. And that's why I sought promotion as quickly as I could so I could help try to keep, you know, cops out there on the street. You know, John was one that I work with, and he is your archetypal, you know, patrol officer who's out there and knows everybody and everything in his beat and really practice policing in the truest, most traditional way that it should have been. And his department, or our department at that time, really had problems with that. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, we're here today to talk to you, which is really at some point, enough is enough.
Yeah, and there's been this attitude amongst the public that, you know, that's the way that the police really are, that they're there as kind of security guards, as peace officers. And I think for the most part, they're really surprised and taken off guard when they see, like we just saw in Texas, a 93-year-old individual killed by the police because he was carrying a gun. I mean, it's absolutely insane what we're seeing here. But let's talk about some of the specifics there, because in New Mexico, you just recently had the police academy, the state police academy, institute a shoot first training procedure. Is that correct?
I'm not specific. I don't have the specific details on what their use of force policy is. Although I do know that they've departed from the traditional model that they've been using throughout the state, which is the reactive control model, which is, you know, an officer's actions are predicated upon, you know, the citizen or the suspect or the other person's actions first. Mm-hmm. If what you're hearing is that there's a proactive element, then that's a huge departure away from established training, and will find itself addressed in the courts, you know, as soon as the first incident of that sort of that practice happens. You
know, we saw here at INFOWARS, somebody alerted us to a contractor who had what they called no hesitation targets, and these targets were basically just ordinary civilians. It would be a kid with a gun, a pregnant woman with a gun, an old man with a gun, and they were selling these to Homeland Security, and then they blocked that web page and pulled it down, but we archived it first. And in New Mexico, I covered a story there where an instructor at the state academy called it a shoot first training program and refused to teach that curriculum and actually resigned over that issue. But there's other issues too. I mean, when I was looking at, since we've seen this homeless man killed, there's been 3 more fatal shootings by the police department there in Albuquerque. One of those was a 19-year-old girl, Mary Hawks. They were looking for a stolen vehicle, which led them to a trailer park. And at 5 in the morning, they cordoned off the area, announced that they were going to be releasing dogs. Is that what they would typically have done in your tenure there, Officer Doyle? I haven't asked you a question yet. What is that standard procedure, or is that something new?
Sure. If they're looking for a suspect, what they'll do is with the Albuquerque Police Department, if they have a certain area that they believe that suspect's in, they'll set up a perimeter. They'll have officers that go in each corner of that perimeter, and then they'll flood the area with more officers. They'll hold that perimeter until they can then search it and stay out of it, so that, you know, keep it safe. Announce to citizens through PA that they're out there, let them know to stay inside their house so no one gets accidentally bit or has a run-in with the police or gets hurt by any actions of an offender. But they'll cordon off an area, and then they'll call in K9, and they'll systematically search that area and go from there. But if they, I don't know. That's exactly the way they would do it. They would call in a K9 unit to search the area.
Okay. All right. Well, when I looked at that, I mean, that description of it sounded a lot like when they went door to door in Boston, the aftermath of the bombing. They're looking for a terrorist suspect and essentially pulling people out at gunpoint in their houses. I mean, would that be part of standard procedure?
That's not something I would do, and that's I wouldn't. Never pull anyone out of their house at gunpoint. We would check the houses, and what we would do is we'll look for suspicious activity. But what as an officer, what I would do is just make the citizens aware that for their safety, to kind of stay inside their house, kind of stay put. Just be aware, call 911 if they hear any suspicious activity or anyone in the backyards or, causing a commotion. That could alert us to the area and let us know where that suspect might be.
Okay.
Yeah.
But to add, I think you illustrate a really good point, which is they essentially treated a nonviolent offense, that being the unlawful taking of a car, and she wasn't found in the car and then fled. They found information that led her to the car.
That's right.
So we had a nonviolent offense, yet they treated it in a manner consistent with what happened in Boston with a large scale act of terrorism. To treat all things the same like that, I don't think that's how we want our departments to operate. I really don't.
Exactly. I would agree with you. And I saw some footage of her fleeing through a parking lot where they had surveillance cameras. Now, what happened, for those who don't know the case, she fled out of the trailer park. They pursued her, and then an officer said that she pulled a gun on him, and he shot and killed her. Now, when I saw her running, I mean, she looked, as a young girl, she's panicked, she's running with both hands. I mean, she didn't look like she was carrying anything or trying to keep something on her. Now, the interesting thing about that is that he had cameras that he did not use, because I guess, when they had that video footage of the homeless man shot, I guess a lot of them maybe thought twice about whether or not they wanted to use their cameras. But if she did, in fact, pull a gun on him, those specific cameras, once he activated it, would have gone back with a 30-second buffer, so he could have protected himself and proven that she really did have a gun. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
So, yeah, and that kind of brings up the whole issue of the corruption that's there, because there's a lot of investigation going on with the former police chief about this contract with Taser for these specific cameras, the Axon cameras. Is that correct?
Yeah, those cameras weren't considered the top in Consumer Reports, the Axon cameras. Alan, Tom, explain. Tom knows a lot.
There is, my understanding is that there's a multifaceted investigation going on regarding the former chief's conduct with Taser, and that the selection of that particular product isn't exactly consistent with his representations, which was it was the only product out there. There's been publication by the Department of Homeland Security, by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that show there's as many as 10 different vendors providing officer-worn digital video recording equipment. So it's an unfolding investigation, and my understanding is that at the earliest we're going to hear something in June about where they're taking it, but it is ongoing.
Let me hang right there, because I haven't been able to get to this case of Mary Hahn yet, and we're out of time, but I want to continue this interview after the end of the program. We'll have that online for everybody. Stay with us. Right after the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about the corruption, and then we're going to talk about a suspicious murder case of a civil rights attorney in Albuquerque. Well, I wanted to continue this interview because there's so much to talk about what's going on in Albuquerque. As we mentioned, it's symptomatic of so many things that are happening throughout the country in police departments. It's not just the attitude toward the public, it's not just the corruption, but as we see in the murder of a very prominent civil rights attorney, there's a lot more than just escalated number of fatal shootings there. Now, just before the break, we were talking about the contract between Taser and the Albuquerque Police Department. The former police chief, before he left, he had a lot of contact with him, and some news media there in the area have looked at emails going back and forth. It looks like there may have been some unethical, inappropriate behavior guarantees before he left the employ of the APD, while he was no longer police chief but still employed there, and then afterwards there may be some issues with that. But it's not just the cameras, is it? Isn't there some other no-bid contracts that were put in there by the Albuquerque Police Department?
I think when you start looking at the vendors who have benefited or have any sort of contractual relationship with the city, with the department, whether it's armor that officers are issued or bought, whether it's weaponry, that being the Smith & Wesson M&Ps, or now the Glocks, because yesterday the department is now disallowing all officers from carrying out any personally owned weapons. So now Glock is going to get a big contract for outfitting the department with new pistols, whether it's rain gear or uniforms. The department has the ability to steer its personnel towards certain vendors to buy those products. And over the years, the department has been fairly selective in who it sends what gear is worn and who the officers, who